in those blue zones where people live over 100 years, there is an aspect of infrastructure for social integration. There is, as you say, the walls of the small city, the way the streets are built, so you connect and bump into people. And I have always been very passionate about the infrastructure aspect of community, literally like physical space. And in that context, we can be talking about literally the urban planning aspect, like
Mhm.
cities of community, or just the village aspect, how it feels to be in a small village.
Welcome, everybody. And we are joined here today on Talk About Your Community with a friend of the show, Lais de Oliveira, the author of and founder at Hacking Communities, the author of the book, which is right behind me here. Lais, how have you been? It's been about a year since you were on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me again, Todd. It's a pleasure. And I've been great. I used to have a 1 year old. Now I have a 2 year old, and that's a world of difference. And I've since joined a company full time and left, but that has been an amazing experience. I consulted for a few other companies as a fractional community officer, community executive. More recently, I've been head of North America at Time Left, whose mission is to enable people to make friends all over the world
I
and
love that.
eradicating loneliness in that way. It's been an amazing journey. And now I'm back to my own realm of exploration, uh, specifically interested in rebuilding the infrastructure of care in the world. I call it rebuilding that village. It used to be reinventing communities, and now it's rebuilding that village. And luckily, I'm not alone. In fact, I think learning about this industry more than anyone as a new mother, but I'm trying to really think about how community applies at a macro perspective, especially when it relates to caring for loved ones that need a lot of time of our times, and how to still pursue careers and networking and community and purpose amidst all that. So how we need that village to exist. But I've been great and having a lot of fun.
That's wonderful. The infrastructure of care. I think you said I like the framing of that, and I like the idea that we don't necessarily need to use the word community in everything. The idea of rebuilding the village, I think that resonates back to our original conversation about a year ago when we were talking about how the ways that our contemporary society has evolved from villages or smaller gatherings to bigger cities where we're now finding like people are feeling left out. They don't feel like they belong. They feel like they're misfits. And it's led to that sense of disconnection and loneliness in those places. I think that there's a lot of vitality to that phrase that you use around, creating an infrastructure of care and rebuilding village. Along
Yeah.
with that, if I'll just do a quick plug, anybody, if you haven't seen our last interview from a year ago, it was, I think, one of the best of the year that we had done, and you were absolutely brilliant, Lace. I was my usual mediocre self, but I thought you were wonderful, and we'll put a link to it. I'll have Kalisa, our engineer and showrunner, I'll put a link to it up here in the playback, so somebody can jump over to that, bookmark it, watch it after you've caught up with us here on this special edition. But really, really wonderful conversation that time. I know we're going to have a lot here. What I'm kind of curious. Could you say a little bit more about like what like your choice of the word infrastructure of care? I'm
Yeah.
really intrigued by that idea.
Yeah, I think that when you see societies, and I think when I wrote my book, I was emphasizing a lot on like longevity as an example, as an evidence of the importance of community. And of course, I was riding the wave that already existed from John Cacioppo to Susan Pinker to many others who talked about loneliness and the impact it has in our health system. And I was a single woman then, and I was living on my own. So I was caring more about maybe how long we shall live if we don't smoke. Now, one thing that it's mentioned in there is that in those blue zones where people live over 100 years, there is an aspect of infrastructure for social integration. There is, as you say, the walls of the small city, the way the streets are built, so you connect and bump into people. And I have always been very passionate about the infrastructure aspect of community, literally like physical space. And in that context, we can be talking about literally the urban planning aspect, like
Mhm.
cities of community, or just the village aspect, how it feels to be in a small village. And this has always been part of my theme. Like the thinking of cities and villages, I have written about it in hacking communities. I have mentioned about it in previous texts. The idea of rebuilding that village was always there, and the concept of like small towns. I'm a small town girl, moved to big cities, and I feel even before moving to New York, I mentioned New York as an example in my book because I
Mhm.
mentioned, on one hand, when you are in a big city like New York, you gain the benefit of social expression, a freedom of self expression. You can be yourself, whoever you want to be, nobody cares.
Mhm.
But then there's
Mhm.
the other aspect of nobody cares, which is nobody cares, like
Right.
loneliness.
Right.
So I'm very interested in the physical aspect of community, proximity, and like how do we build that? And even in remote worlds, when you're building digital community, I think a lot about the architecture of how people connect. So when you think about care, which is literally caring for the people around you, for your neighbors. And it could implicitly mean caring for the ones who need us most. It could be someone you love who's elderly. It could be someone you love who's too young to make his own decisions, like my 2-year-old.
Mhm.
Um, but caring for those who need your help, and that requires your time, which is a physical, like not physical, but it's a limited currency. It's something that it's tangible. It becomes more evident there's a lack of infrastructure, there's a lack
Mhm.
of spaces for me to go and belong to. Parental loneliness is even proportionally more impactful than generalized loneliness. There's studies reporting that 61% of parents, specifically young mothers, feel miserably lonely. And
Mhm.
because if before I was a single woman and noticing the impact of loneliness, now I don't even belong in the spaces I used to, from co-working spaces to restaurants to bars to
Mhm.
music concerts. I can't belong there with my kid. I'm no longer that digital nomad I used to be. So I'm going a long way to say the way we design the world is not welcoming or inclusive either for those who need care or for those who are caregivers. And that's something that I've learned makes up a great majority of society. And we've been ignoring the needs of physical space and public space. And I'm saying I'm painting this broadly. It's not as dire as I'm painting. There are a lot of good initiatives out there and there's a lot of good spaces. But in general, that's what I call the infrastructure of care. Does that make sense, or did I ramble too far?
No, no, no. It makes total sense. And I mean, we were talking a little bit about this before the recording. I relate very strongly to what you're describing. I have an elderly mother and some other family members that are in their late 80s who need more care, and it can feel very isolating. I know my wife and I will often kind of say, wow, we really need some younger friends, in our lives, because we feel, disconnected, from a lot of that. Even as much as I do feel very connected to my local community. I'm part of the business association. I'm part of, the local Rotary Club, and some of those things. And I do want to get your take on Robert Putnam. We talked about him a little bit before the recording as well, in that sense of loneliness and disconnection and civic disconnection that we have. But I really like how you shared that. So much of my practice as a community strategist and community architect has been like I've always been attracted to that word architect, because you're literally planning spaces, and whether it's digitally or in person. And some points that I've regularly made is, don't mistake the platform for the community. However, that platform needs to be fit to the purpose of the people that you want to invite there and
Mhm.
be involved there, which is why big social media generally isn't a good choice for those spaces. Can I build a community in my Facebook group or on X? Maybe, but is
Yeah.
that a building that was built for that purpose? Not really.
Yeah, I find that channels that tend towards broadcasting, which is one too many, make it challenging. You can build a following, and your followers can start like drifting off a post and commenting and talking to each other within that. That can happen. But I don't believe there is a community unless there's a conversation that goes in multiple ways. And those channels where broadcasting is a focus, the only room for community is in the comment section,
Mhm.
and that can exist. But I'm in agreement that I prefer cozier rooms, and I think the world now, there's a tendency and a very very strong interest in looking for tighter communities, micro communities, IRL communities are in the rise for a reason. And that's another thing we can talk about maybe after Putnam. But like, I think there's a correlation between the rise of these micro spaces and IRL communities with the need for more intimate communities than the social media broad spaces.
100%, 100%. And I loved your deliberate use of the word cozier.
Yeah.
That's a term that I have used frequently myself. It really kind of came up in reference to, I don't know if you've come across any writing about the idea of the cozy web, but that notion that some of the best things online are not on social media. They're actually a little tougher to find. They are maybe a little Tumblr, or maybe somebody's personal blog, or a portfolio space, or for somebody's own website. Creative, interesting, wild things that that you won't want to run across in big social spaces. And I think that cozy communities are a thing,
Yeah.
insofar as that as well. Um, I'll ask this. This came up on a conversation I was on in the Community Consultants Collective the other day, which is for other independent community professionals. And I was bringing up an author who I follow, who used to write a lot of comics, Warren Ellis. He kind of fell out of favor. He did some kind of sketchy things, but like I still like his writing and a lot of the things he talks about. And one of the things he said in one of his recent newsletters was, Google is now useless. It's now dead to me,
Mm.
as a way to find other authors or interesting writers or other things. And everyone is niching down into these small communities. They're huddling down because the dark
Yeah.
internet is, or the dark forest of the internet is very extractive of value for everybody. And so all the really cool creative people are now gathering into these little enclaves of private niche social communities, but you
Interesting.
but you can't find them. They're too hard to find.
Yeah, very hard to find. This is the thing. It's very intricate, and if you are like, it's like moving to a new city and not knowing where the good parties
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And oftentimes in life, and it happens so that you may have belonged or currently belong to those cozy communities of things that you might no longer be interested in or might no longer be relevant to you. And that happens a lot when you go from living abroad to going back home to care for your elderly parents, or you become a mother or a father, where your interests suddenly change, and you're still yourself and you still want to talk about curiosity and the things that drive you, but you need to find that niche within the realm of like the new topics you're interested in right now, or simply the time you have is not the same you used to, and the environments you need are no longer the same. So I feel that chase for it's very hard to find, and honestly, it's been excruciating and in a way identity crushing to have become a mother in a
Hmm.
way that Brandy Carlisle put it best. uh, she has a song literally called "The Mother," and said, "On my road, the friends are out accomplishing their dreams, but I am the mother of Evangeline, and I'm inside my house, and I don't know like that." The entire song is perfect, by the way, reflecting the reality of like I love where I am, and this is my new life. Yet I am feeling often isolated and like simply disconnected, like pulled
Hmm.
apart from that world I used to belong in. And now I need to find a new world. And it's extremely hard to find those new communities to the extent, personally, I'm going back to square one of community building in my own life, where I'm doing what I've done in 2014 for startups, but now for mothers in New Jersey across the pond from New York, where I've moved to. And
I love
my
that. That's wonderful. Yes.
and by the way, you might notice you called out to my last interview. I still had like a long hair, New York like lifestyle. Now I'm like officially mom Bob living in Jersey. It's a lot has changed. And I feel that building, living in a smaller environment doesn't necessarily lead to tighter community. I found like I'm
Hmm.
still scrambling to find community in the smaller city I've moved to. And I feel that the process you're describing of finding those cozy communities, literally community mapping is one of like you always go back to square one, no matter how experienced as a community builder you are. And in the internet is even harder. And it takes first knowing what you're looking for, which is oftentimes too different when you're and challenging when you're jumping to a new phase. But I digress. Go back, please go back to what you were saying. You're making,
No,
yeah,
no, I think what you're saying is all super germane, and I mean, I definitely like. Although I have no children, I can empathize with that idea that when you have a child, that is an identity changing,
yeah,
identity shaking moment
yeah,
in your life, and it changes the way you look at everything. Everything is through the lens of how do I help this little person, have a safe thriving life, and it changes your perspective on what's important, on where you're spending your time. It maybe takes you away from things that you maybe would have wanted to do, but uh, but now
yeah,
like your priorities are totally different,
yeah,
as a result of it. And so kind of finding yourself again, rebuilding your personal village, your
yeah.
internal village, is, I think, such a critical thing. And I think it's wonderful that you're finding ways to connect with that by connecting with other mothers within the region that you're at. Is that an in-person community that you're trying to create?
There is like actually, well, there's two things. One thing I want to comment on, I think there's a three topic here that may interest both parents and non-parents, and it's the idea of how community contributes to civic engagement and how that is fundamental
Mhm.
for democracy, which is pretty much like instead of listening to me, maybe you should just watch Join or Die and read
On
Bowling
Netflix.
Alone.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, by Robert Putnam, which is so John Norda is, I think, the easiest access to Robert Putnam's work. It's about him, he's interviewed throughout, and it's an amazing studied example of how societies that are more successful within their democracies are those where people participate more. And that participation doesn't necessarily take shape in political organizations. It's about the local clubs, the local dance club, is the
Yeah.
local bowling club, is the local moms club, you name it. It's the more people help each other and connect to each other as neighbors, the more they tend to feel satisfied with their government at the level of their area. So there's a correlation between high civic engagement and people's satisfaction within their communities. And that also, the opposite is also true. The more isolated we feel, the more set apart, the more we are prone to things like fundamentalism or victim to more authoritarian systems. So Robert Putnam's work illustrates best than I would ever be able to explain here in like 30 seconds the importance of community, belonging, and social integration, that infrastructure we've mentioned, for people to feel that they can influence their governments and live a happier life in the public sphere. One example I have is that I've just moved across the pond from New York to Jersey. Can jump on a ferry and be there in 40 minutes quicker than when I lived in Brooklyn. Yet it's a whole new world. And I'm just getting in. And very recently, there was a threat that they would close the local schools, the elementary schools, right where I live. And I've watched closely the community mobilizing, and it was amazing. They had a Discord with hundreds of parents and signs, and their grassroots movement burst so fast. And to be very honest, I'm new here. I was almost like watching it and observing it, then being a part and trying to immerse myself in them at the same time.
Mhm.
My kid is not yet at school, but I care about it, obviously. But the bottom line is that they have succeeded within a couple of weeks to make the mayor delay the closure of the schools. And now this group that has been formed is mobilizing to create a longer term proposal to avoid the closure of the schools. But they have succeeded quickly in making change that otherwise, if they were in an isolated society, that school would have been shut.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we have the tools for civic engagement right now, and we have physical spaces. But this I want to say, we did, at least in this space, we had a public library where people gathered, we had a Discord that was created, we had PTA, parent teacher associations, that were pre-built and mobilized. And we need those leaders to mobilize, and that cannot cause effective change. That's the message I'm trying to share. So that's where I am right now. I'm in the space of trying to immerse myself in this world that already exists, of a very luckily mobilized society around me. And on the flip side, I'm still trying to find my place, which is also where I personally belong, is back to that idea of being a mom in itself, and being the mother of a kid that's going to be in school defines me to a certain extent. But I'm also an entrepreneur, an
Mhm.
author, a creative, and that's where I'm missing. I have no problem finding mom groups, but I have an issue finding the friends I had, for example, when I lived in Asia. We were all entrepreneurs, all creatives, all building unconventional lifestyles. Now in Jersey, I'm trying to find those moms who've always wanted to start a business and or have started and succeeded. And big part of what I'm doing right now is literally trying to have conversations one on one with those who've made it. And I'm like inspired about how did you do this while raising kids, and also making space for those who want to make it. So
Mhm.
I'm in the Venn diagram of mom working remote and wanting to live a flexible life that allows me to spend more time with my kid, and entrepreneur, creative. I want to make something, build something relevant for the world. And I'm immersed in this new environment where I'm starting community the way I did back in 2014, as I've mentioned. Before, my job was to create lighthouses for entrepreneurs. And
Mhm.
from there, to create cozier spaces and relevant spaces for them to connect and to keep those conversations going. I'm literally at the verge of creating lighthouses for my local moms who also want to be creative and entrepreneurial, to meet and gather, and it could take shape in any sort of excuse. Lots of references to hacking communities here,
Yes.
but what matters is that, like, building those lighthouses is only the beginning of finding my people, which whom I'm yet to find. It's very exciting. I'm starting something new on my own, and I've been doing this for a while. It's a longer time now to incubate new ideas compared to like years ago, when I would be like, okay, I have an idea, I execute it, and within a week it's done, and I started to build. Now I'm slower, I'm more deliberate, because I can't afford to just spend time in an idea that might not flourish.
Mhm.
That said, I move slower than I did before, but I move more intentionally. And I'm building this community. It's been a while, but it's coming. It used to be called Kinder Spaces. Now I'm building something new, more local, more micro, but with a expandable global potential chapter, like targeting parents, not just moms, who also want to cultivate their entrepreneurial side.
So many wonderful things there that I could tag on to. Yeah, I don't
Here.
know where to begin. So first of all, I think the Robert Putnam, uh, live example you gave of sort of that group that stood up to see that school didn't close. That's sort of the organic creation of this group of people that wanted to take some action and banded together to make that happen. It what that made me think of was Cory Doctorow in his State of the World conversation that happens on the Well every year, was talking about not just communities, but the rise of coalitions. And I think what you were describing was sort of like the idea there's this coalition that naturally comes together. They want to take some kind of pro-social action, to get something to happen. But then the continuation of that then becomes a community or becomes a village. It's that reignited thing. And sort of how do we engineer those opportunities serendipitously for things to grow? I thought about that. I also thought about something you were saying about how how building these new communities, how creating these new communities and spaces can sometimes be challenging because, at least in a digital sense, it's very easy to spin up a new space, a new Slack, a new Discord, a new place for everybody to belong. And so, as many options as there are, those things need to really resonate powerfully with someone. That it's got to be something they really want to do, something that's hitting them at home. And for me, that really connected strongly with the idea of Putnam, saying that like this informs civic discourse and civic understanding because it's bringing together people around a particular cause. And once they see that, although we've maybe got a lot of different viewpoints, we kind of want the same things. That's a very uniting factor, and it builds trust in a community, it builds trust in a space.
Yeah. And
Overall.
what I think is especially relevant because the people who were engaged in this Discord, and it, first of all, it was amazing to see it emerging from nothing
Yeah.
into a Discord with several channels self-organized by the community, by the neighborhoods, and how that built a sense of unity within this neighborhood, which pre-existed but wasn't that organized. People, there was a public library that was doing a lot of cool stuff. There was a PTA, Parent Teachers Association, but they were like loosely connected. Once
Mhm.
this school closure event happened, this threat, they came up together and organized. And that this is what the definition of grassroots for me is. That someone, there was nobody necessarily leading it. The leaders naturally emerged, but suddenly there was organization, and suddenly there were t-shirts being made and signs being made and fundraisers and movements and people announcing where to meet for a specific protest or where the board of education meeting was happening, all that information flowing freely with one single interest. Now the most interesting part is that I was in this Discord conversations mostly reading and trying to catch up. I'll be very honest because
Mhm.
it's not, first of all, I'm not a mother of a kid who's in school yet, so it was hard for me to be at the same level of information as everybody else. Also, I just moved here.
Right.
No excuses, but that I was a bit like, oh my god, there's a lot going on and it's awesome, but I almost couldn't find where to fit in and how. That being said, I was just watching, and one of the comments there really struck me as like, this is amazing. Like, someone was saying, we are all of different political inclinations here. We have people here who voted for Trump. We have people here who did not vote for Trump. We have people here who don't care. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. We care not to close our school that has a very high rating, by the way. And
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense. We just want access to the budget. We want fairness. We want clarity. And that's what we were fighting for. And we all have the same North Star. So I feel that certain things are not political. Civic engagement doesn't need to be political. And back to Putnam again, it doesn't matter which side of like parties you're in, which side of the, let's say, the range of scope of like thinking you're in. What matters is as local neighbors, communities, as as like units of professionals, whatever community you belong to, you have common interests that exceed politics.
Mhm.
And I feel that that's your North Star. That's what brings us together. And community starts, in my opinion, at the local level with an interest or a need. It could be simply that you are a mom who doesn't want to be alone. It could be just simply that you are a dad who wants to go bowling with your friends and meet new friends, or you wanna join a soccer league. And but those, I think, genuine connections, they weave a fabric that whenever needed can be activated. That's what I've learned. And that fabric is what Robert Putnam talks about, that we need to incentivize. And as local initiative builders, local gatherers, call
Mhm.
yourself whatever you want, local community builders, you may be building something that seems politically irrelevant, but bringing people together to make them feel safer goes a long way. Then my biggest belief is that that's the infrastructure.
I love that. And it resonates with me in terms of some of the local groups that I've been involved with that have, come together around different events like a business expo or, something that involves the interests of multiple groups that were maybe kind of going off their own direction for things, but then the unifying influence of having a cause or a need that organically evolves, that brings people together. And you're right; it's not political. It doesn't need to be political in that sense. Really wonderful. I also think a lot about so the book Putnam wrote after Bowling Alone was about sort of charting how we got here, and
Hmm. Yeah,
where we're more disconnected than we've maybe ever been in the history of the United States, at least. And I think he charts from around the time of the Civil War up through the 60s, which was a time of growth of clubs and organizations and joining. Like there were clubs popping up everywhere. All kinds of things. The Rotarians, the Lions clubs, many service organizations that were out there, not necessarily well representative of all the various people that have interest in communities at that time, but it really hit its high point in the 60s, and then we've been declining ever since then, in terms of those groups and organizations. And so I think like one of his messages is how do we build more of those spaces. And I think, for me, like one of the salient questions of our time with the wonderful technologies we have that connect us across the globe, from each, to each other is uh, how do we make those, how do we create that sense of community locally,
yeah,
as well as in those online spaces? Yeah, I absolutely want to be connected to other people that have anything to do with community building across the world. That is my community, in
yeah.
one sense. But I'm also living here in a physical space on the shores of Lake Michigan in the state of Wisconsin, and I want to feel I belong here, and I'm
Yeah.
connected to these individuals as well.
And I think that I come from a similar space where I have cracked the code in building like national level and global entrepreneurial communities and making those instances of serendipity engineering, from events to spaces for entrepreneurs to meet and connect and grow in the way an entrepreneur wants to grow, from Argentina to Africa to Malaysia to everywhere. So I've done that for Startup Grind, Startup Genome, the government of Malaysia, and that was my world. And that means that I have a tendency to believe that building global and building remote and building highly impactful economic development communities is the only way to be relevant. So now that I'm craving friendship, it was great to join Time Left to reimagine the importance of friendship, which is essentially the core of the company and the need thereof, of someone who cares for people just making friends. And I had mentioned Robin Dunbar in my book, and
Mhm,
that reignited that idea of Robin Dunbar circles for the
mhm,
CEO of Time Left, that to the point they've got connected in touch, because we're back to that point of like, we're talking about your community. That's what Dunbar speaks of. That he's not talking about macro. He's talking about you, Todd, in your top 5, in your top 15. and how that is important for the general societal fabric.
Hmm.
And now, I think I think I actually am shutting down that need for maybe grandiosity or just like building something relevant, impactful, scalable, back into building things that A might not scale or as well might, but building local first and being very proudly building local first. Right now I'm building something that maybe is not gonna be my cash cow, but it's my ultimate need for my own happiness and health. And I think the message that I want to share is that like Lais going from doing amazing stuff worldwide to now focusing on building her local moms group may not be relevant enough for LinkedIn. But if everybody was focused on building those local communities and grassroots, finding a gap where that is needed and building it nonetheless, that could be the key for a more integrated society in the world and aligns really well with my purpose when I built and wrote hacking communities, which is I believe everybody is a community builder. And I feel that if everybody, for instance, one of the big places of community that I find is my local yoga studio.
Hmm.
That woman is filling a huge gap, and I don't need to go there and fill that gap. But it's filling a huge gap for people who care for wellness, spirituality, well-being, and that is a local yoga studio. But if we had more of those people building those local communities, not just a business, a real space for people to have conversations and gather and recognize each other's faces, that's what builds safety in the long run. If more people were caring to build local communities, would likely be less in the troubles we are that are related to loneliness and to the risk of becoming fundamentalists and falling victim of authoritarian regimens. I'm not saying that we are. I'm saying that like local communities unrelated to politics, just because you need friendships, are important. Building things on scale is important, and I'm trying to follow and respect that need and build that for me, for myself right now. In finding my target audience may not be the glamorous founders I used to interview at Startup Grind,
Hmm. Hmm.
who are billionaires in their own currency. It's more um, maybe that mom who always wanted to start her own business and is too shy to believe in herself, but she needs to, for real. And I know that sounds maybe like the way I put it, I hope it doesn't sound patronizing because I'm that mom right now. Like, I'm someone who is feeling shy of starting her own thing and not being relevant enough. And I feel that's my space to build. I want to build for those people who are feeling the same. And I don't care how big it grows. And it could grow really big. What I want to say is that I feel that like you may need your job, you may need your larger community, you may need your cash cow, but building those and founder communities count too. Like what I did at On Deck, what I see people doing at Hamptons, those are very people from Startup Grind are still doing it. Those remain relevant, of course, but I'm saying building locally, not building locally for the fear of it being irrelevant is the wrong move. I believe
Definitely.
more people building locally collectively would be amazing and impactful. And I'm talking about bowling clubs, whatever you want, the running clubs, whatever you want to do, that's needed right now. And people are craving IRL unscalable communities.
Lais, I cannot think of a better note to end our conversation on today. Really great message for anyone out there that is either thinking of building locally or building a community for their brand or for their startup that's out there. And I know one thing for sure, that whatever communities you turn your hand to will be wonderful and thriving spaces.
Thank you. And
Thank you so much.
I need to give a shout out though to the people also as a reference for you who are interested in building IRL. There's literally this community now in starting San Francisco called Build IRL. They are an accelerator for local community builders. I highly recommend speaking to Sam and Colton, who started it, and it's just brilliant to see there is so much convergence and so many communities now being built for people to meet in person in smaller groups. There's a lot of power in that, and if you are someone who's thinking on building RL, I highly encourage that, and let me know if I can help you on your journey as well. We can grab coffee online or offline.
Very generous. That's wonderful, Lace. Thanks for the reference to building IRL. We'll be sure to grab a link for that and put it in the show notes. And in the meantime, I hope you continue to, do amazing things, as I know you will. And it's so good to catch up with you again. Thanks for being on the show.
Likewise, thank you so much. And I rambled a lot. I hope that's okay for everyone here. So,
There was no rambling. It was all relevant and highly interesting. And for those of you who tuned in, thanks for watching the show. We appreciate you're here. We would also love it if you found value in this. If you would subscribe to the YouTube channel or our LinkedIn company page for Clocktower Advisors, share, comment. Would love to know your thoughts about community building, both at the local and the global levels. And in the meantime, please take time for yourself and get away from the screen for a while, get into the outdoors, walk out your front door and meet your neighbor, and keep building great communities. That's all we have for today.
thank you, Todd. Have a good day.